So what happens to us when we die? Do we live a life and just go up in a puff of smoke? Do we disappear altogether? I hadn't given it much thought until my father died, and he was always around me. And a friend of mine went to see a medium. She said, "You owe me £50 because the medium, it was your father wanting to talk to you." So I finally agreed, went to this medium, and she said, "Your father's here, and she's with somebody called Andrew." And I couldn't believe it. Andrew? It was a child I had to let go at age 16. And I had a lot of grief about that. My father knew nothing of it. So there was Andrew sitting there. And I said, "I'm so sorry. I had to abort you. I had no money. I was a child. I had no way of taking care of you." And Andrew said it was our soul agreement. He wanted to come in, be born, and experience rejection. And on my side, I had to experience great grief and great loss, which instigated me to leave Australia and go to Europe. I just couldn't stay there anymore. So in the grand scheme of things, we helped each other. So, I mean, I just about fell off the chair at Andrew sitting there, and it just brought me such peace of mind. So my father had brought him in to talk to me. And then he said at the end of it, "Tell your mother I have the dog." And I said, "What dog? What are you talking about?" And he said, "I have your mother's dog." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about this, but I'll call her afterward and say you've got the dog." So I was in London and I called my mother in Australia and I said, "Dad said to say he's got your dog." And she burst out crying and she says, "How did you know about any dog?" I said, "I didn't know anything." She says, "I just had the dog put down and I was so depressed and so upset." "Well, that's great. He's got the dog, so we don't have to worry about that anymore." So that was proof to me that life carries on. And my father actually helped me many times to put messages across when something bad was going to happen to me. So he'd come in and say, "Put your boxing gloves on, girl, and deal with this." So he never really left. And when people die, they're actually much freer because they're not carrying all the burdens of, living on earth. We have to find our rent. We have to, work. We have to, it's heavy going. So they're free. They've lifted their burden. They're very light. And so it's only a thin veil separating us. And after that experience, I learned to speak to people who had passed over and really, it's really good to know that life carries on. So even if you're contemplating suicide, it won't do you any good because you have to come back next time and deal with the situation. And, oftentimes we feel so overwhelmed and we can't cope, but it's good to work through it and resolve it because there's no getting away from it. Have to deal with it sometime or other, this life or next time round. Sorry. When my mother died at 94, she wouldn't cross over until she'd spoken to me. And that morning I had a feeling she was around, and my friend said she was here, and she said, "Your mother's here." And she was all goosebumps all over her. And she was saying what my mother said. And to clarify and to make sure it was true. I wasn't just making it up. I called my friend in America, Peggy, and she confirmed. My mother said she didn't want to cross over. She had to speak to me. She thanked me for being her daughter. She thanked me for loving her, and she told me a lot of things. And she said once she'd crossed over, she saw what a misery she'd been. And she says, because you have a life review, and she'd lived her life in misery. You know, as a pioneer of Australia, things were tough, and very tough to be a woman, raising children, and, you know, she lived in the outback of Australia. And she said she was sorry she'd lived her life as a misery, and she was glad that I'd left. And she says, your life is amazing. And she said, now I can enjoy myself. So she has a ball now, and she's all dressed up, and she comes in and out. And she came one time riding a horse like she used to do when she was 17. And so it just proves to me that life carries on. And then we are the ones that have a life review and decide where we didn't do things too well, so we can come back the next time. We choose our parents and the situation which will be of benefit to us. So we're in charge all the time, and we are the ones that make judgment on ourselves, nobody else. God loves us unconditionally. So bearing that in mind, life takes on a different perspective. And after I saw that and spoke to my mother and my father, I thought, well, I'd just clear every issue that I knew about, and even ones I'd delve into, find ones I didn't know about, so I could have a clean slate. So that's the benefits. And our loved ones are still around loving us and cheering us on and so proud of us, really. So love never dies. Never ever dies.